It was just another Tuesday for Rose Martinez. At 85 years old, she still woke up every morning at 5 a.m., her fingers stiff with arthritis, as she prepared her simple breakfast before heading to the diner where she'd worked for the past decade. Her previous career of 40 years as a nanny to countless children had ended when families began seeking younger help, leaving Rose with little choice but to find whatever work she could to supplement her meager Social Security checks. "Good morning, sweetheart," Rose called out to Tina, the young waitress who reminded her so much of herself decades ago. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Despite the pain in her joints and the heaviness in her heart, Rose always found something beautiful to acknowledge. It was a habit she'd developed during her years caring for children, finding joy in small moments. The Paradise Diner was nothing special to most people, just another roadside establishment off Highway 95, outside Las Vegas. But to Rose, it represented survival. The owner, Frank, had hired her when no one else would, telling her that her warm smile and gentle manner would make customers feel at home. And he was right. Regulars came specifically on Rose's shifts, calling her Grandma Rose and leaving generous tips that she carefully saved in an old cookie tin beneath her bed. That particular Tuesday seemed ordinary enough. The breakfast rush had ended, and Rose was refilling salt shakers when the bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up immediately, focused on her task and the growing ache in her lower back. "I'll be with you in just a moment," she called out, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Puerto Rican heritage. When Rose finally turned to greet the new customer, her heart nearly stopped. There at the door stood a mountain of a man, his broad shoulders practically filling the frame. Dark sunglasses covered his eyes, and a baseball cap was pulled low, but Rose would recognize that smile anywhere. It was the smile she had watched develop from baby teeth to adult, the smile of little Dewey, the boy she had cared for all those years ago. Dwayne Johnson stood frozen, his own recognition dawning slowly as he studied the elderly woman before him. The leather booth creaked under his weight as he slid in, removing his sunglasses. Their eyes met across the diner, and for a moment, time collapsed. Rose saw not the famous movie star or former wrestling champion, but the little boy who had once cried in her arms when neighborhood kids had teased him. "Miss Rosie?" His deep voice carried across the nearly empty diner. "Is that really you?" Rose's hands trembled as she set down the salt shaker. Memories flooded back, of bedtime stories read in animated voices, of bandaging scraped knees, of teaching a young boy that gentleness could coexist with strength. "Dewey," she whispered, using the childhood nickname few would dare use with the renowned Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. What brought him to this particular diner, miles from the glamour of Hollywood, seemed like fate. Later, Dwayne would explain he was scouting locations for a film, taking a detour to clear his head. But in that moment, all that mattered was the recognition blooming between them. Teacher and student, caregiver and child, both now adults with paths that had diverged so dramatically. Rose approached his table, menu in hand, but forgotten. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the maturity that had shaped his boyish features into the man before her. "You've grown up," she said simply, emotion making her voice husky. "And you haven't changed a bit," he replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. Time had carved its story into Rose's face, had bent her once straight back, had spotted her hands with age. But something in her eyes, that sparkle of mischief, that well of unconditional love, remained unchanged. "What are you doing here, Miss Rosie?" Dwayne asked, gesturing to her uniform, the name tag that read simply, Rose. "You should be retired, enjoying life." Rose smiled, the practiced smile that hid 1,000 worries. "Life is expensive, Dewey, and I've never been one for sitting still." She didn't mention the medication she sometimes skipped to afford rent, or the heater she left off during mild winter days to save on utilities. As Rose took his order, just coffee black, Dwayne watched her move carefully between tables. He noticed the slight wince when she bent to pick up a dropped napkin, the way she leaned against the counter when she thought no one was looking. The woman who had once chased him tirelessly around the yard, who had danced with him standing on her feet, now moved with the cautious deliberation of old age. When she returned with his coffee, he asked her to sit for a moment. "Frank won't mind," Rose assured him, though she glanced nervously toward the kitchen. He's always telling me to take more breaks anyway. Tell me everything, Dwayne said, his famous intensity focused entirely on her. What happened after my family moved? Last I heard, you were taking care of the Rodriguez twins. Rose's story unfolded in pieces between serving other customers, how she had continued nannying until her 70s, when families began to seek younger help, how her savings had dwindled during a lengthy illness, how this diner job had been a blessing, allowing her to maintain her tiny apartment and her dignity. What Rose didn't say, what she would never say, was how often she had thought of all her children over the years, how she kept a photo album with newspaper clippings of Dwayne's rising fame, feeling a surrogate mother's pride in his accomplishments. How sometimes, late at night, she wondered if any of them remembered her at all. As the lunch crowd began to trickle in, Rose excused herself. "Duty calls," she said with a smile. "It's been wonderful to see you, Dewey. You were always special to me." Dwayne remained in his booth, watching as Rose greeted customers, filled coffee cups, and moved with determined efficiency despite her age. He saw how she stopped to chat with an elderly man dining alone, how she slipped an extra piece of pie to a young mother with 2 restless children, how she remembered every regular's order without writing it down. He thought about the woman who had shaped his earliest understanding of care and discipline, the woman who had taught him that real strength came from kindness, the woman who now wore orthopedic shoes and served burgers to make ends meet while he commanded millions per film. As he prepared to leave, leaving a tip that made Rose's eyes widen, Dwayne made a decision. This chance encounter wouldn't be just a nostalgic moment, a brief intersection of lives before they diverged again. No, this was an opportunity, a chance to repay a debt he hadn't even realized he carried. "I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Rosie," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't just a polite goodbye. "We have a lot more catching up to do." What Dwayne Johnson set in motion over the next few days would change Rose Martinez's life forever. But as he walked out of the Paradise Diner that Tuesday afternoon, neither of them could possibly anticipate the extraordinary journey ahead. The next morning, Rose's routine began as it always had, the same early alarm, the same careful application of lotion to her arthritic hands, the same modest breakfast of toast and tea. But something was different. For the first time in years, she found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her silver hair into a neater bun, applying a touch of the lipstick she saved for special occasions. The prospect of seeing Dewey again had awakened something in her, a flicker of the vibrant woman she once was. The Paradise Diner looked the same as it always did. Vinyl booths worn smooth from decades of use, the perpetual smell of coffee and grease, the flickering neon sign that Frank kept promising to fix. Rose had arrived early for her shift, meticulously arranging sugar packets and wiping down already clean counters. By 10 a.m., she found herself glancing at the door whenever the bell chimed, though she tried to temper her expectations. Celebrities had busy lives. Perhaps yesterday had been nothing more than a pleasant coincidence, a brief intersection of paths never meant to cross again. "You expecting someone special today, Rosie?" Frank asked, noticing her distraction as she polished the same spot on the counter for the 3rd time. "Just an old friend," she replied, unwilling to name Dwayne and invite skepticism. Who would believe that The Rock himself had promised to return to their humble establishment? The morning rush came and went. Rose served pancakes to truckers passing through, refilled coffee for the retired men who gathered daily to discuss politics, and fussed over a young family with twins that reminded her of children she had once cared for. By noon, she had convinced herself that Dwayne wouldn't come. Why would he? Their worlds were so different now. Just as Rose was taking her first break of the day, settling into a back booth with a cup of tea to rest her aching feet, the diner fell suddenly, unnaturally quiet. She looked up to see Dwayne Johnson filling the doorway, this time accompanied by a woman Rose recognized as his assistant from magazine photos. Several customers had their phones out, discreetly, and not so discreetly, capturing the moment a superstar walked into their local diner. "Miss Rosie," Dwayne called out, ignoring the stares as he made his way directly to her table. "Taking a break just when I arrive?" His teasing tone transported her instantly back to his childhood, when he'd used the same voice to negotiate a later bedtime. "Some things never change," Rose replied with a smile, remembering how he'd always interrupt her rare moments of rest as a child. "You always did have perfect timing." Dwayne slid into the booth across from her, his massive frame dwarfing the space designed for average-sized patrons. His assistant remained standing, efficiently redirecting excited customers and creating a buffer of privacy around them. "I brought something for you," he said, sliding a worn photo album across the table. "Found it in storage last night after I left here. Had my team fly it in from Miami." Rose's hands trembled slightly as she opened the album. There, preserved between plastic sheets, were photographs she had nearly forgotten existed. Dwayne as a toddler, beaming proudly on his first tricycle. Dwayne at 7, missing his front teeth, arms wrapped tightly around Rose's waist. Dwayne at 12, already showing signs of the physique that would later make him famous, pretending to scowl while Rose kissed his cheek. "You kept these all these years?" she asked, emotion making her voice unsteady. "My mom did," he admitted. "She always said you were more than just our nanny. You were family." As Rose turned the pages, the diner around them faded away. She told stories behind each photo. The time young Dwayne had tried to cook breakfast and nearly burned down the kitchen. The Halloween she had stayed up all night, making his warrior costume. The hours she had spent helping him practice lines for his first school play. "You were there for every important moment," Dwayne said quietly, "and I never properly thanked you." Rose shook her head. "That was my job, Dewey." "No," he said firmly. "Your job was to make sure I was fed and safe. You did so much more than that. You taught me respect, discipline, compassion." He paused, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about something you used to tell me when I was a kid. Remember what you'd say when I'd get frustrated because things were hard?" Rose smiled, the memory immediate and clear. "I'd tell you that the hardest path often leads to the most beautiful view." "Exactly," Dwayne nodded. "I've carried that with me through every challenge, through wrestling when my body was breaking down, through those early auditions when nobody took me seriously as an actor, through the times I had $7 in my pocket and didn't know how I'd make rent." He reached across the table, his massive hand engulfing her weathered one. "You helped shape me, Miss Rosie, and now I find you here, still working at 85 when you should be enjoying life." Rose gently withdrew her hand. "I'm fine, Dewey. I've always found dignity in work." "There's dignity in work, yes, but there's also dignity in rest when it's earned, and you've earned it 100 times over." Their conversation was interrupted as Frank approached the table, his usually gruff demeanor replaced with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Johnson, but we're getting pretty busy and—" "Say no more," Dwayne said, rising to his impressive height. "Miss Rosie has work to do, and I respect that." He turned to Rose. "Can we continue this conversation after your shift?" "There's something important I'd like to discuss with you." Rose nodded, suddenly aware of the crowd that had gathered outside the diner's windows, word having spread rapidly through town about the Rock's appearance. "My shift ends at 4, she said. "I'll be back at 4, he promised. Then, to Frank's obvious delight, Dwayne posed for photos with the staff, signed several napkins, and ordered lunch for himself and his assistant to go. Before leaving, he leaned down to whisper in Rose's ear, "Don't make any plans for tomorrow. I've got a surprise for you." The rest of Rose's shift passed in a blur of excited customers and endless questions. "How do you know Dwayne Johnson? Were you really his nanny? Is he making a movie here?" Rose answered patiently, sharing just enough to satisfy curiosity without betraying the private nature of their connection. As her shift neared its end, Rose found herself in the bathroom, trying to freshen up with the limited resources available. She smoothed her hair, pinched her cheeks for color, and straightened her uniform. In the mirror, she saw not just the lines etched by time, but the stories written in each one. Years of loving other people's children, of financial struggles, of quiet dignity in the face of growing old alone. What could Dewey possibly want to discuss? She wondered aloud to her reflection. Whatever it was, she resolved to make one thing clear: she would accept no charity. Her pride had sustained her this long. She wouldn't abandon it now, not even for the boy who had once been like a son to her. At exactly 4 o'clock, as Rose hung up her apron, the diner's bell chimed once more. Dwayne had returned as promised, this time with a bouquet of wildflowers, her favorites, just as they had been decades ago when he'd pick them from the yard and present them proudly after school. Rose's eyes lit up at the sight of the wildflowers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "You remembered," she said softly, taking the bouquet in her weathered hands. "Of course I remembered," Dwayne replied. "You used to say that fancy roses were beautiful, but wildflowers had character." He gestured toward the door where a sleek black SUV waited. "I thought we might go somewhere quieter to talk. The diner's become something of a hotspot today." Rose hesitated. She had planned to take the bus home as usual, change out of her uniform, and perhaps watch a bit of television before preparing a simple dinner. Her life ran on routine, comfortable, predictable, and safe. But the earnest look in Dwayne's eyes made her nod in agreement. "Let me just get my things," she said, retrieving her worn purse and cardigan from the staff room. As she walked back through the diner, her co-workers gave her encouraging smiles and thumbs-up gestures. News of her connection to the Rock had elevated her status considerably. The interior of the SUV was more luxurious than anything Rose had experienced in years. The leather seats were soft, the air conditioning a blessed relief from the Nevada heat. Dwayne's driver navigated them away from the diner, following instructions to a destination Dwayne had not yet revealed to Rose. "So," Rose said, trying to maintain her composure in these unfamiliar surroundings, "what's this important matter you wanted to discuss?" Dwayne turned to face her, his expression serious. "Miss Rosie, do you remember what you told me when I was 8 and the other kids made fun of me for being bigger than everyone else?" Rose nodded, the memory crystal clear despite the decades that had passed. "I told you that being different wasn't a burden, but a gift, that one day you would grow into your greatness." "And you were right," Dwayne said. "Everything I've achieved, in wrestling, in movies, in business, started with believing that my differences were strengths, not weaknesses. You gave me that foundation." The SUV turned onto a tree-lined street of modest but well-maintained homes. Rose glanced out the window, wondering where they were headed. "I've been successful beyond anything I could have imagined as that insecure kid," Dwayne continued, "and I've tried to use that success responsibly, to give back, to help others." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I missed something important. I forgot to look back at the people who helped me get here." The car slowed and pulled into the driveway of a single-story house with a small garden and a covered porch. It was nothing extravagant by celebrity standards, but to Rose, it represented a kind of stability she had long ago stopped dreaming about. "Whose house is this?" she asked, noticing flowers planted in patterns she particularly loved. Marigolds bordering hydrangeas, just as she had once arranged in the garden she tended while caring for Dwayne. Dwayne's expression was unreadable. "Let's go inside. There's something I want to show you." The driver opened Rose's door, offering a hand to help her step down. As they approached the house, Rose noticed small details that seemed oddly familiar. A brass door knocker, shaped like a hummingbird, window boxes filled with the same herbs she had grown decades ago, a porch swing that reminded her of one she had often shared with young Dewey during story time. Inside, the house was immaculate and warmly furnished. Photographs lined one wall, many featuring Dwayne throughout his career, but interspersed were images of Rose herself, younger and vibrant, surrounded by various children she had cared for over the years. "How did you get these pictures?" Rose asked, bewildered. Some were from her personal collection, images she kept in albums in her small apartment. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She let my team in this morning while you were at work." Dwayne watched her face carefully. "Don't worry. They were very respectful. Just gathered some things I asked for." Before Rose could process this information, Dwayne guided her to a comfortable chair and sat across from her. "Miss Rosie, I've spent the last 24 hours learning everything I could about your life since our family moved away. I know about your struggle to find work as you got older. I know about the medical bills that drained your savings 5 years ago. I know you've been living in that one-bedroom apartment with unreliable heating for 8 years now. Rose's back stiffened. I don't need pity, Dewey. I've managed just fine. It's not pity, he said firmly. It's respect and gratitude and the recognition that sometimes the universe gives us chances to right imbalances. He leaned forward, his massive frame somehow gentle in its intensity. You spent years taking care of other people's children, including me. You helped shape dozens of lives while sacrificing the chance to build financial security for yourself. I made my choices, Rose said quietly. I have no regrets. I know, Dwayne nodded. That's what makes you extraordinary. But now, I'm making a choice too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, which he placed in her hands. This is for you. With trembling fingers, Rose opened the envelope and pulled out a house key and a folded document. As she unfolded the paper, her eyes widened. This is a deed, she whispered, to this house. Fully paid for, Dwayne confirmed, along with property taxes for the next 20 years. There's also an account set up to cover all utilities and maintenance. He gestured around them. Everything here, the furniture, the appliances, even the garden, it's all been arranged based on what Mrs. Chen told us about your preferences. Rose stared at the document, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the gift. I can't accept this, Dewey. It's too much. It's not enough, he countered gently. There's more. Open the drawer in that side table. Rose did as instructed, finding another envelope. Inside was a bank statement showing an account in her name with a balance that made her gasp. That's a monthly stipend, Dwayne explained. Enough for you to live comfortably, get the medical care you need, and never worry about working again unless you want to. Tears filled Rose's eyes, emotions warring within her. Pride that had sustained her through difficult years fought against overwhelming gratitude and the profound relief of knowing her constant financial anxiety could finally end. Why? She managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Dwayne moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. Because you gave me something priceless when I needed it most. Belief in myself. You saw potential in me when others saw problems. You taught me values that have guided every decision I've made. His own eyes glistened with emotion. This isn't charity, Miss Rosie. This is an investment in someone who invested everything in me when I was just a difficult kid with big dreams. Rose looked around at the house, her house, still struggling to accept this sudden transformation in her circumstances. What will I do now? She wondered aloud. Work has been my whole life. Dwayne smiled. Whatever you want. Rest, travel, volunteer. The point is, for once in your life, you get to choose based on what brings you joy, not what pays the bills. As the reality began to sink in, Rose noticed something she had missed before, a desk in the corner with a computer, printer, and shelves filled with children's books. What's that? She asked. That, Dwayne said with a gentle smile, is phase 2, if you're interested. I've established a foundation to help aging caregivers like yourself, people who spent their lives nurturing others but were left without support in their senior years. If you want, there's a place for you there, sharing your wisdom, helping guide the foundation's work. But only if you want. No pressure. Rose's tears flowed freely now. You really did grow into your greatness, she whispered. 3 months had passed since that life-changing afternoon. Rose stood on her porch, watering the hanging plants that now thrived under her care. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the promise of autumn, and Rose breathed it in deeply. At 85, she had never expected to experience such a profound new beginning. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. After nearly a decade in her small apartment, adjusting to this new home had taken time. For the first few weeks, Rose had found herself waking disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. She'd walk through the rooms at night, running her fingers along walls that were actually hers, half convinced she would wake to find it all a dream. Miss Rose! Miss Rose! A child's voice broke through her reflections. 8-year-old Zoe from next door came bounding up the garden path, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. Can I show you my science project before school? Rose smiled, setting down her watering can. Of course you can, sweetheart. This was perhaps the most unexpected joy of her new life, the neighborhood children who had gradually started appearing at her door. Word had spread quickly about the elderly woman with endless patience and fascinating stories about raising the Rock. What began as curiosity had evolved into genuine connection, with Rose becoming an honorary grandmother to several local families. Zoe proudly displayed a solar system model, planets hanging precariously from coat hanger wire. Saturn's ring keeps falling off, she admitted with frustration. Let me show you a trick, Rose said, leading the child inside to her kitchen table, where she kept a sewing basket. With deft fingers that belied her age, Rose demonstrated how to secure the ring with invisible thread. There, strong but barely noticeable, just like the best kind of help. After Zoe left for school, Rose prepared for her day. Tuesday meant foundation work, which had quickly become the cornerstone of her new purpose. Dwayne had been true to his word about Phase 2. The Caregiver Legacy Foundation was now operational, with Rose serving as its heart and soul. Her role wasn't demanding in terms of hours. Dwayne had been adamant that her well-being came first, but it was profoundly meaningful. Twice weekly, she worked from her home office, reviewing applications from aging caregivers facing financial hardship. Each case reminded her of her own journey, and each approval brought the satisfaction of knowing another life would be transformed. Rose checked her watch. The car would arrive soon. Today wasn't an ordinary foundation day. It was their first major fundraising event, and Dwayne had insisted she attend as the guest of honor. As Rose changed into the new outfit she'd selected for the occasion, a dignified blue dress that made her feel both elegant and comfortable, she reflected on how quickly life could change. 4 months ago, she had been serving coffee and counting pennies. Now, she was helping shape a multi-million-dollar foundation. The doorbell rang precisely at 10 a.m. Rose opened it to find not the expected car service, but Dwayne himself, casually dressed and grinning widely. "Thought I'd drive you myself today, Miss Rosie," he said, offering his arm. "Like old times, except now I'm tall enough to help you instead of the other way around." During the drive to the hotel where the event would be held, Dwayne briefed her on what to expect. There'll be media, some business associates, potential donors, all wanting to meet the woman behind the foundation's inspiration. He glanced at her, noting her nervous expression. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." "I've never spoken to a crowd before," Rose admitted. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "There is no wrong thing," Dwayne assured her. "Your story speaks for itself, and I'll be right beside you the whole time." The ballroom was filled with people by the time they arrived. Conversations hushed momentarily as Dwayne escorted Rose through the crowd, his protective presence making a path for her. She recognized some faces from television and movies, celebrity friends he had recruited to support the cause. What Rose hadn't expected was the display along one wall, enlarged photographs chronicling her life's work. There she was, as a young woman with her first charges, the Patterson twins. There, in her 30s, surrounded by the Rodriguez family. And there, most prominently, with young Dewey Johnson, her arms around him as they both beamed at the camera. "You kept all these pictures," she whispered to Dwayne. "My mother did," he replied. "And when I told her about finding you, she sent everything she had." He guided her toward a sophisticated older woman who approached with tears in her eyes. "Rose," Ada Johnson said, embracing her warmly. "My son told me he'd found you. I've thought of you so often over the years." Before Rose could respond, Dwayne was leading her to the podium. The room fell silent as he adjusted the microphone to her height. "Many of you know me," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly. "You know my achievements, my career highlights. But few know the foundations that made it all possible." He turned to Rose, his expression soft with reverence. "This woman shaped not just my manners or my habits, but my character. She taught me that greatness isn't measured by strength or fame, but by how we treat others." Rose listened, overwhelmed by the portrait he painted of her influence. When it was her turn to speak, she approached the microphone with trepidation. "I'm not used to spotlights," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "For most of my life, I worked in the background, supporting, nurturing, invisible in many ways. She paused, gathering her courage. I loved every child I cared for as if they were my own, not because it was my job, but because it was my calling. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the attentive faces. What Dwayne has done for me is extraordinary, but what moves me most is that he's extending this generosity beyond just one old nanny. There are thousands of caregivers who gave everything to the children they raised, only to find themselves forgotten and struggling in their senior years. By the time Rose finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The foundation had secured pledges far exceeding their initial goals. Journalists were already framing the story as one of Hollywood's most heartwarming acts of gratitude. Later, as the event wound down, Rose found a quiet moment with Dwayne on the hotel's terrace. You've started something incredible, she told him, something that will help so many people like me. Dwayne shook his head. There's no one quite like you, Miss Rosie. He looked out at the horizon, contemplative. You know, people often ask me about my greatest achievement. They expect me to mention a movie or a championship. He turned to her, his expression earnest. After today, I know my answer. Finding you again and having the chance to say thank you. Rose reached up to touch his face, just as she had done countless times when he was a child. The greatest gift isn't what you've given me, though heaven knows it's changed my life. The greatest gift is seeing the man you've become. Strong, yes. Successful, certainly. But more importantly, kind, grateful. The kind of man who remembers where he came from and reaches back to lift others. As they stood together, the legendary action star and the elderly nanny, their story was already spreading across social media. By morning, millions would be moved by the account of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and the nanny he never forgot, a testament to the lasting impact of kindness and the power of remembering those who shaped us. In a world hungry for genuine connection, their reunion offered a potent reminder. True strength isn't measured in muscle or money, but in the capacity to recognize and honor those whose quiet influence helped forge our path.